people, and that was within minutes of the first airplane hitting the World Trade Center. So the hospitals are ready. We'll be moving them to all different area hospitals, triaging them. The main thing is having those streets open so that we can get people in and out of the southern part of Manhattan as quickly as possible, so that we can move them, to hospitals all over the city.
And Mayor Giuliani, we'll let you.
In place, they're doing it. We just need the cooperation of people in getting out of there.
We'll let you get back to the operations there, and we do appreciate you taking the time for us here.
But once again, the only thing to do now is to remain calm and try to assist in the rescue effort.
Thank you.
Now let's pray.
That's New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani talking to a CNN affiliate New York One here, saying that clearly there's going to be tremendous number of lives lost on these attacks here in New York, urging people to stay calm and to leave the area calmly. The area is in the southern part of Manhattan, way down on the tip of Manhattan Island. The mayor urging people to calmly move north. CNN's Jamie McIntyre is at the Pentagon. Jamie, why don't you start, if you can, at the beginning here as we try and put some order to all of this. What happened?
Well, let me just describe the scene that we have here, and I'll back up a little bit. But right now I'm looking at the charred facade of the Pentagon, a huge gaping hole on the side where the Pentagon heliport is located, the side that faces Arlington Cemetery. In front of me is a long line of rescue personnel with backboards. They're just waiting for victims to be brought out so they can rush them to nearby medical facilities. I see a few victims being treated on the grass outside the Pentagon. Firefighters continue to pour streams of water onto the side of the building, and a huge black cloud of smoke continues to billow out. It is a scene of utter destruction here. I'm sure it pales in comparison to the World Trade Center, but I've never seen anything like this myself in the history of the Pentagon. There's been nothing like this. Again, a huge gaping hole. You can see the exposed 5 floors of the Pentagon offices just ripped apart. Our report is that an aircraft of some kind, and at least one witness identified it as a civilian aircraft, hit the side of the building shortly after the incident in the World Trade Center this morning. People who were in their offices nearby reported hearing a huge explosion, seeing shards of shrapnel come by their window. The entire Pentagon has been evacuated. Short time after this attack, there were urgent announcements made over the loudspeaker telling people to quickly get away from the building because they had reports of a second plane heading this way just 2 minutes away. F-16 jets were scrambled over the Pentagon. I saw several of them go by, but no second plane ever materialized, and the building remains completely evacuated as firefighters continue to pour columns of water on the devastated side of the Pentagon, and rescue personnel continue to whisk victims away. We have no report at this time of how many casualties. Clearly, dozens and dozens of people have been hurt, and we presume that there have been some deaths as well. It's hard to imagine otherwise, considering the extent of damage at the side of the building. And I can see just some of the windows side, a stretch of the building, perhaps 40 or 50 feet wide. This looks like it has collapsed under the weight of the impact. Aaron?
Jamie, thank you. So we have planes hitting the Pentagon, or plane hitting the Pentagon, 2 planes hitting the World Trade Center's towers in New York. Alan Dodd-Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Aaron, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sabga and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is covered with thick white ash and building material. The ambulances have been coming now from as far as Long Island. All the rescue workers are being equipped with gas or face filter masks, and firefighters have been arriving even by pickup truck. Otherwise, the streets are now deserted.
Alan, thank you. Alan Dodd-Frank in Manhattan. A little more on this plane crash which is the fourth incident, if you will. There was the plane crash at the Pentagon, crashing into the Pentagon. There were the two planes that hit the World Trade Center here in New York. And we don't know whether this fourth one is related or not, but the report is that a 747 en route from Chicago to New York City crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, about 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's the incident. That's what we are hearing.
And I'm standing next to a fireman. He said, yeah, they just bombed the Pentagon, too.
Our colleague, Jeff Green, well, we have a little more sound here from witnesses.
I'm with the fire alarm company. The doorman goes to me, wow, I never seen a plane flying so low. And we looked out at it, all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real. And we came running over here closer to the place, and all of a sudden we saw the other explosion. I don't know.
Get down! What's happening? She's right there. Come on, man! Move it! Come on!
I was in B Tower. A Tower.
What floor were you on?
B1.
What floor?
The first one.
What happened? Tell me.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Anything else that you saw? Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
About 10 minutes later, the second building went off.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere. Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement. Came down. All of a sudden, the elevator blew up. Smoke. I dragged the guy out. His skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
The words of some of the witnesses here in Manhattan this morning, and the pictures of what will, I suspect, before this is over, go down as one of the most horrific days in our lifetime. We're joined by our colleague, CNN's Jeff Greenfield.
Aaron, you know what? In 1993, when terrorists bombed the World Trade Center, their plan was to knock one of the towers into the other, bringing them both down. That disaster was averted, and bad as that was, in a sense, America was lucky. Another terrorist attack in the planning was interrupted to blow up the Lincoln Tunnel and submerge dozens, maybe hundreds of people. At the eve of the millennium, a suspected terrorist, was intercepted, you remember, at the Canadian border on his way to Seattle. And I know that not so long ago, former President Clinton, in a private talk to a group, ruminated on how lucky the United States has been over the years with the combination of luck and the skill of anti-terrorist people to avoid such things. What we are seeing now is nothing less than the worst nightmare that one could imagine come to life, probably worse than anyone could have imagined. You may remember that Tom Clancy wrote a novel that ends with a terrorist hijacker crashing into the Capitol. The worst act of terrorist violence on American soil, the Oklahoma City bombing, killed fewer than 200 people. All we know today is that tens of thousands of people worked in that complex that has been destroyed. And I hate to say it this way, but this may be the day that America's luck ran out.
Well, it is hard, isn't it? I mean, you look out here, and you see the Statue of Liberty to the right, and these buildings off to the left, the attacks on Washington. We don't know a lot about who's behind this or what this is all about, but the symbolism of these attacks is extraordinary. CNN's David Ensor is in Washington, and he joins us. David?
Aaron, I'm talking to U.S. officials who are obviously working on who is responsible for this. Their working thesis is that this is overseas terrorism, not domestic. They say they cannot rule out additional attacks yet to come. In terms of claims of responsibility so far, there is an Agence France-Presse report in which a group with the word Palestine in the name claims responsibility. There is in which which a group with the word Palestine in the name claims responsibility. There is also a report quoting personnel close to Osama bin Laden, the fugitive Saudi accused terrorist, denying that that group was involved. But again, U.S. officials say they can't shed any light on whether these reports are correct or incorrect. Usually when this kind of attack occurs, you have claims of responsibility from all sorts of people who had nothing to do with it. So it's a very fluid situation at this point. But the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States has been evacuated from its headquarters in Langley, Virginia. There are some key personnel still in the headquarters, but the operations center has been moved elsewhere. U.S. officials saying they don't want to talk about where exactly the headquarters staff and operations staff has been moved to. But that staff is focusing now on trying to find any shred of information that could help the U.S. government figure out who is doing this and how to put a stop to it. Aaron?
David, you tell me if I'm right or wrong here. As a practical matter, there are not a whole lot of groups that the United States government knows about that are sophisticated enough, have the kind of money, the resources to pull off something like this. Fair enough?
That's absolutely true. And obviously, despite the denial, attention will quickly turn to the bin Laden group because it has long tentacles. It has connections with all sorts of other groups. We saw at the Millennium a group of Algerians apparently involved in trying to arrange bombings in the United States, and now there is evidence being produced in court sessions that those Algerians were working for the bin Laden group. So that group certainly will come under immediate suspicion. There are very few others that could have pulled this off. Aaron?
Right. I mean, just because of the enormity of it all and the sophistication required to stage these multiple attacks, this is not something some small cell can pull off. This is obviously a group or groups, well-financed and extraordinarily well-organized.
That's correct. Now, another thing you'll notice is that you remember the attack on the USS Cole in the Yemen harbor. That was the first time that kind of an attack using small boats with bombs in them had been used against an American warship. It worked once. Now the U.S. Navy has taken steps to make that much more difficult to do. Officials saying this may work once. They will now have to take measures to try to make sure that this kind of thing can't be done again. But these are apparently hijackings of civilian aircraft. So it was a sort of modus operandi that was dreamed up in some evil terrorist's mind and done on a massive scale here today, Aaron.
David, thank you. CNN's David Ensor, our national security correspondent, on what he is hearing, what he knows, what the reports are as we approach 11:20 Eastern Time. For those of you just joining us, and as you can see on your screen, the Taliban, the government in Afghanistan, expected to make a statement soon, and we'll monitor that for you. For those of you just joining us, let me try and put as many of these pieces together as I can as we stand here in New York. At about 8:45 Eastern Daylight Time this morning, the first of the Trade Center towers was hit by a plane. It crashed into the south side of the tower. About a half an hour later, a second plane came from the right, and you can see it coming behind the first tower, and then it hits the tower, and you'll see the flame and smoke coming out, I guess 3/4, maybe a little more, up the tower. That's where this all began. About a half an hour after that, the first of that tower that is now you see in flame there in your shot collapsed. The top collapsed. And there was an enormous, I don't want to say explosion, but there was an enormous plume of smoke, sparks, as we looked over from where we're standing. And then a little bit after that, and I want to be careful on time because it seemed perhaps 10 or so minutes, but I'm not sure. The second tower, which in fact was the first one hit, collapsed as well, and that's what you're about to see. Our reporters in the area say they heard loud noises when that happened. It is unclear to them and to us whether those were explosions going on in the building or if that was simply the sound of the collapse of the buildings as they collapsed, making these huge noises as they came down. But as we look back, the smoke now, which has gone from white to a kind of gray, clearing away, we are, I guess, Jeff, I want to know what's behind the smoke, but I have the worst feeling is that very little.
And the fact is that we've already been hearing from even the fragmentary reports from people on the ground, stories beyond horror, people jumping out of windows because of the flames. The fact that this happened shortly before 9 and then the second hit shortly after 9 means that most of the people were either right in the vicinity or actually at their desks. So one doesn't want to be overly grim, but the fact is there were thousands of people were in these two buildings.
And again, 50,000 people come to work in those buildings. Many thousands more pass through those buildings every day. There are retail shops on the lower floors of the Trade Center.
It is where the PATH trains from New Jersey come in.
Correct. The trains, the commuter trains coming from the other side of the river from New Jersey come in and drop off and pick up their passengers. So it is an extraordinarily busy area. It is also an area, for a number of reasons, rich in symbolism to this city and to the country. You can see from where we are the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor in the scene. So that's what happened in New York. At about the same time, and again, I don't want to put times on much of this yet, after one of these hijacked planes hit the Trade Center in New York, events started to unfold in Washington. A plane hit the Pentagon. And then there was a major fire at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon has now been evacuated. The State Department has been evacuated. The president, who was in Florida, went before cameras to denounce, as you would expect, and as we would expect, this terrorist attack, promising to hunt down those responsible. It was the president himself who first used, at least as I heard the story unfold today, the word terrorism. There was no doubt in his mind, at least. The president now is heading back. We are now getting a report from that American Airlines says that one of its flights, a flight from Boston to, I believe, Los Angeles, correct me guys if I'm wrong, is down, or at least they've lost contact with it. 81 people on board. This would be the second of American Airlines flights to have been involved, presumably, in this event. Another flight, this one from Dulles to Los Angeles, is down with 54 passengers on board. So again, so there are two American Airlines, one Dulles, Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, the other Boston to Los Angeles. Both American Airlines planes reported by the airline to be down. It is also believed that an American Airlines plane, a 767, was involved in one of the hits on the Trade Center as well. We don't know if there's a reason why it is American and not any other. We won't speculate as to whether there is or not. We'll just tell you what the facts are as we get them, and that's what we have. American says two of its planes down, and I assume that is two other than the one that hit the Trade Center, and you guys check that out to make sure I'm right.
And we have a report of a crash in Somerset County, outside of Pittsburgh.
Right, I believe a 767, though we're getting reports perhaps a 747, which doesn't quite fit into what we believe flies Chicago to New York, is also down as well, and I do not know the airline involved there. Let me just go back on okay, I do now. It's a United Airlines plane. So we have a number of planes down, a number of planes involved in these attacks. The Boston to Atlanta, if I'm reading the notes correctly, had an American 767 with 81 passengers on board, 9 flight attendants, 2 pilots.
Flight 11.
Reported down. That's American Airlines Flight 11. And American Airlines Flight 77, which is a 757 jetliner, Dulles Airport outside of Washington to Los Angeles International, with 58 passengers on board, 4 flight attendants, 2 pilots, also reported down. And then there is this United Airlines jet, which crashed about 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh.
We should also mention, I think, Aaron, that inevitably some of these early fragmentary reports are going to be needing correction, and that will be done as soon as possible. We had a report of a second hijacked plane on the way to Washington. Capitol Police were reporting that there have been no signs of that plane. We simply, at this point in this awful story, have to just tell our viewers we will do everything we can to report this accurately. If fragmentary reports need amending or correcting, that will be done immediately.
And I think in fairness here, there is in a number of places right now, perhaps 4 or 5, chaos. And numbers that come out aren't necessarily going to hold up. And in our reporting, we will be a bit conservative on some of this until we track it down. There's no point in allowing this thing to seem worse than it is. It is already horrendous, and we don't need to make it any worse by misstating numbers, and we want you to keep that in mind. CNN Medical Unit reports that the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the Centers for Disease Control, is preparing bioterrorism teams to respond to the incidents. This, we are told, is simply precautionary. We have absolutely no reports and no evidence that there is any biochemical or bioterrorism going on, but clearly what is happening in every department of the United States government, and I suspect in every department of most major cities right now, the plan that they hope they never have to implement, the plan that they spent years preparing, is now in effect, not just here, not just in Washington, but around the country, because no one knows precisely where this is going. CNN, my colleague Judy Woodruff joins us from Washington. Judy?
Aaron, we've been watching this here in the Washington Bureau. I'm in the studio now, just a few blocks from the Capitol, from the United States Capitol, and the first thing I want to tell you is that everyone, I'm sure, on their minds is God rest the souls of those who've lost their lives this morning in New York, in Washington, near Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. It is just a story for which there are no words to describe. Here in Washington, we are keeping a very close watch on the Pentagon. You've been reporting, Aaron, and other CNN correspondents. A plane evidently crashed, a commercial jetliner crashed into the Pentagon earlier this morning. Approximately 60-foot section of this building, which is, of course, the headquarters of all the military for the United States, was on fire as a result of this crash, and then collapsed. These are some of the pictures we've been bringing our audience from the Pentagon. We've watched people being treated by first aid personnel there. We have no information yet on casualties, on the number of people who may have been hurt or may have died in this incident, although emergency personnel on the scene have said surely there have been casualties there. Elsewhere in Washington, every federal building has been evacuated or is in the process of being evacuated. I'm now told that United Airlines is now saying that flight, can you tell me the number of the flight? 93 has crashed in Pennsylvania. Now, a flight from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. Now, we don't know if this is the same airplane that Aaron was reporting a little earlier crashed in Somerset County near Pittsburgh. Aaron had reported that some minutes ago, and now we are getting a confirmation from United Airlines that its flight, United 93, on the way to San Francisco, has crashed. So we now have at least 2 commercial airline companies in the United States. American Airlines reporting 2 of its passenger jets down, one flight Dulles in Washington to Los Angeles, and then another flight from Boston to Los Angeles down, and now we have United Airlines reporting at least 1 airline or airliner down with concern about another one. So the pieces of this story continue to come together. I have to say, in my 30 years as a journalist, I have never seen anything like this, never covered a story of the dimensions of this, and I'm sure it's safe to say that's the case for for my colleague Aaron Brown, and for any one of the other many correspondents, producers, and others with CNN and our colleagues at the other news networks. And I would just remind you that CNN right now has producers, correspondents all around the world who are watching for any more information that we can bring you at this point. As Aaron and Jeff Greenfield have been saying in the last few minutes, everything we have right now is fragmentary. We are simply reporting to you what we are learning from police, from the federal government, from the CIA, from David Ensor, from our other correspondents. And I'm now told that former U.S. Army Commander General Wesley Clark is joining us on the telephone. Former commander of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is joining us from Little Rock, Arkansas. General Clark, from your knowledge of the military, you know the Pentagon. What are you thinking right now?
Well, good morning, Judy. First of all, we've got to try to assess what's really happening, and as all of the news reports indicate, it's clearly a coordinated effort. It wasn't announced, and it hasn't been announced that it's over, and we don't know how it will finally conclude, so there's likely to be more trouble before all of this concludes. So we've got to protect the American people first. We've got to look after those who are injured. We've got to take precautionary measures to deal with future incidents, and I think all of that's underway with a lot of responsible action by people everywhere. The damage at the Pentagon is unclear from all the news reports that I've seen. The one report that said it crashed into the Army side of the building. There are command centers in various places of the Pentagon, and there are many other alternate command centers. So I don't think there's really any issue about the command and control of the United States Armed Forces. I'm sure that's very solid right now.
General Clark, why do you say there's likely to be more trouble?
Well, we're hearing still reports of aircraft that are out there. There's no way of knowing when all of the possible incidents have either taken place or been aborted by whoever it is that's behind this. And so we have to be ready for whatever might happen next.
General, can you give us some sense of, clearly the United States has never experienced anything of this magnitude, but what are the leaders of our military, the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense and others, what presumably are they doing right now in order to be on top of a situation where you have the Pentagon on fire, New York City in a state of chaos, and every federal building in Washington evacuated?
Well, first of all, we'll be trying to assess what happened. We'll be making sure that the protection posture of our bases worldwide and all of our units out there is raised so that we're able to protect our forces and our family members, and then we'll be looking to provide assistance to wherever such incidents might occur. Whatever military capabilities there will be that could be of use will be certainly made available to the other agencies of state, local, and federal government who are involved in trying to deal with these tragedies right now. Then beyond that, we'll be waiting for the information to come in about who may have been behind this, and we'll be looking at what measures can be taken to strike and prevent further actions or in punitive retaliation.
Well, speaking of that, General Clark, wouldn't you agree there are very few of the terrorist groups, at least that we're familiar with, who would have the capability to pull off something this coordinated on this scale?
I think that's exactly right. There's only one group that has ever indicated that it has this kind of ability, and that's Osama bin Laden's. So obviously that'll be the first suspicion.
Clearly we are all in a state of shock, General Clark, but is it fair to say that you're not truly surprised by this, given what we've heard from that particular group? And again, we don't know who's behind this, but given what we do know.
Well, there have been many threats made against the United States and threats of terrorism, and we know that the World Trade Center has been a target. We know that aircraft have been hijacked, and we know that car bombings are used in many places in the world, and there's no doubt that for a long time there have been groups who